it's really, really difficult to be reflective. And so it feels like more of a risk. But when you finally come to real peace and solidity about who you are, it gets easier. You care less about what someone might think or how they will interpret you. You just, you're clear, like, this is who I am. This is what I believe. And, the hard part of, like, helping people to appreciate what you tell them, like, that's still difficult. But it gets a little bit easier to be the deliverer of that, sometimes uncomfortable truth. Dimensions of the page.
The curiosity for me would be, how are they going to look at it? I don't even know if you can ask that question. Are they going to look at a full page, or are they going to look at it in the way that we just were flowing? So
I'd imagine that they print them out.
What is this for?
You might want to hit record.
It's recording. We're good to go. Where do we begin?
I have been very fortunate my entire life, as I was surrounded by storytellers. And the storytellers range from, like, old sage, fossil-like men and women, both in the deep, deep South, where I was whisked away to as a young boy, to parts of rural Virginia, West Virginia, and then Georgia. And then almost tragicomic, Shakespeare-like clowns on street corners and bus stoops in Penn Stations, Newark, and New York City. Men and women who appeared to just be lost in madness or drug or drink, who could tell a story. And that exposure was supported by my family, in that I was exposed to the quote-unquote party records, the foundation of modern-day black comedy, stand-up comedy, in the recordings of Red Fox and then Richard Pryor. It was not age-appropriate material by any stretch, but
we all listened to it.
There was more than humor in those recordings. There was wisdom. And then I was given books. And for a long time, I was a quiet, even secret reader. And then I transitioned to comics. And then I had classroom teachers that changed my life, in that they gave me books that were assigned, but they also gave me books that connected to an evolving imagination. And so the nucleus of it being, like, some element of storytelling has been central to my life. But by the time I was 16, 17 years old, I'd already had roles that suggested I was going to be some type of educator. And that was pushed by lots of my friends through undergrad. But it was also near the end of undergrad that I started to take some creative writing classes. And I knew that it wasn't an idle waste of time for me to scribble on paper. But I was busy. I did not devote the time to writing. I was pretty athletic. I was social. And those were worlds that were immediately available, whereas a life of the mind, a life of a committed writer, that was isolating and limitlessly time-consuming. So I didn't devote to it. And at this, paralleling that, I was given other hobbies of essentially isolation. I was a really young boy when my stepfather put a camera in my hands for the first time. And, at 14, 15, I had a camera of my own, and then through college. But these photography memories were the equivalent of like cell phone selfies. They were not intentional, meaningful, aesthetic efforts. And then in my 20s, I took my first real photo classes at Parsons and SVA in New York City, and met some really interesting people. And that's when the idea of making photographs that had some intention and, dare say, craft made sense. But again, I was coaching and playing soccer and fully alive in the nights of New York City. And so that was another exercise that required attention and time and isolation. And so I didn't embrace that wholeheartedly. Now at, about to climb out of my early 50s, my limbs don't support the communal dynamic, consistent effort of athletics. And my interests, photography and writing, like keep calling me back, and I'm beckoned to it because it's around me. And so when Mr. Dale arrived to Peddie, it changed my relationship with the photographic life of the campus. My camera and my interests and the images that I made, they were mine and mine alone, and no one saw them. But with Dale, I felt invited to participate and to speak of my experience and to speak to students. And so I feel really encouraged by that. The other thing that happened is there was one wonderful silver lining of COVID, and it came out of a gesture from my wife. We were all home. Peddie was remote. My son's school was remote, and my wife was in a position to be off from clinical health care for a while. And so she made the house an art colony. She took to painting on significant canvases. Our son was busy with iTunes and listening to music, and then from iTunes to GarageBand and his own tinkerings with sound, but also sketching and reading and strumming a guitar and dabbling with a keyboard. And I wanted to return to camera work, but I was very dissatisfied with my equipment. Canon equipment at the time was this sort of collage of buttons and deep internal menus. And I wanted something that was more tactile and, classicist. I wanted an old body with the old functions, and I found cameras that provided that. And I started to shoot more and more and more. And since COVID, my images have a greater intelligence. There's a scope and depth and a commitment that much of what I had done with the camera through the late 90s and early 2000s, they just don't have. And that's leading me to so what do I want to do now? And maybe go back to school. So there's a summer opportunity that it's a workshop. And so I want to apply to this workshop for this 4-day experience of being in the company and under the tutelage of established writers and photographers. And depending on how that summer experience goes, determine what my next steps are going to be in terms of a potential MFA Master in Fine Arts experience. But there are adults who, by my request, are secretly reading, the 25, 30 pages of prose that I have, and that I can't get away from. Like the same narrative, the same transformations of my relatives and my family in the city of Newark. They keep coming back to me either as dreams, as things that I write down, as illusions that I make really, really fluidly in conversation. In short, it's haunting. And my boyhood friends, and I have a lot of them, we have stayed in touch. They say, like, you need to write more of this down and tell the story. And for all of us, it's ironic because a number of us grew up in the same neighborhood as Newark's most celebrated writer, and that's Philip Roth. And here I am, contemplating a different story for the city of Newark. And Roth had been its primary novelist for 40 or so years, maybe 50, while he was at Princeton. And I grew up just mere blocks from the house that he grew up in. And I know his novels, and I know how different what my take is on the city of Newark through the 1950s, 60s, 70s.
It's a brutal history.
Yeah. And it's a period where several of his novels depict that period, or at least chunks of those novels depict that history. And then there's a segment of the history that he never really covered in prose, and that's the period that I lived. So from 70 to 80 through the 90s and early 2000s. That's a story that's not being written down or told by many people, published or unpublished. And so that's, when you asked me earlier, have I been busy? Yeah. That's what I'm thinking about.
That's incredible. So you would say this childlike love for telling stories over time is manifested through photography and trying to maybe send a message through the photos that you take?
Yeah. And it's different than prose or fiction in a way. The embrace of fiction is mandated by schools, or at least my schooling. And so we had great teachers. They assigned classic books, and we were guided magically to see ourselves in those texts. So when we read James Baldwin and Ralph Ellison and Toni Morrison when we were, 16, 18, 19, 20 years old, it was an easy transference from reading the novel to understanding our own story and figuring out, can I tell this in, snippets? And for a lot of my friends, like, rap music sort of became the vehicle. So, a form of poetry, a genre of poetry became the vehicle for narrative. Whereas I was more grounded in, like, long form. And at the same time, I was aware of the photography of Gordon Parks and Van der Zee when I was 10. My grandmother subscribed to Life magazine. And so what Life magazine for most Americans was the platform through which they saw the most iconic of American photographs. And so having those magazines around the house was a small workshop in image richness and camera work from early on. And I wasn't a reader of the magazines per se, but Life had an oversized format. It was not the standard 8.5 by 11-inch magazine. It was, I want to say, 16 by 10 or 16 by 12. Like it was substantial. And so we just leaf through it, and they'd have these large covers, and the covers would draw you in, and then you leaf through and skip the prose, and you'd see these layouts, and you start to pay attention to light, shadow, depth, and then the people. And when the subjects of the photographs were already famous people, then it just pulled you closer to, the current moment, the news of the hour. And news was easier to navigate then because we didn't have as many options. You had 2, 4, 7 as the primary networks, and then you had 5, 9, and 11 for TV, and 2, 4, and 7 were essentially the same coverage.
People may not know what you're talking about. Those were the channels on TV.
That was like this is pre-HBO,
pre-cable.
Yeah, pre-cable altogether, and I mean traditional cable, like connected to the telephone pole outside. The remote control was connected to the TV by a wire, and so you didn't have to quote unquote surf around. You just got what you wanted, and it gave you a common platform. And so looking at those images sort of prepared one to be conscious of like, what is a good photograph?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Do you remember the smell of Life magazine?
Vaguely. If it was wet, absolutely. But that's the smell of all wet paper. But fresh, before the gleam had come off the pages, I don't remember the smell.
We got Life and National Geographic, and I can remember taking National Geographic came in a paper sleeve, and you would take it out, and it would reek like a printing plant. It would still have the smell of the printing plant,
Wow.
and I can still remember that smell.
Yeah, I think it's incredible how much complexity there is behind anything. And with the example of photography, you can see it so clearly. Like so many things that go into taking such a great photograph. And I think there's so much complexity in everything in life that we just don't take the time to really explore. Like even just last week, I was talking to Chef Stahl, and there's so much complexity behind the kitchen, what's going on, how the waiters are getting all the food ready and everything's prepared, and hearing how much you put time and thought into how you design a story and how you take a photograph. I find that really incredible. Mr. Dale, how has photography came about in your own life?
So, thank you for that. The thing that resonated for me, and like you just made me want to ask you like 30 questions. So slow down. Let's look. Gotcha. But like when you say that you were seeking storytellers as a young boy, right? So I was definitely seeking things as well. And for me, the question I wanted to ask you is, what was your relationship with your father like? And was that sort of an impotence to look outside of your house and try to find other ways to communicate, other sort of like ways to be a man or find your way?
My dad passed suddenly during my mother's pregnancy. So I arrived and, he was already gone. But we lived in this neighborhood that was straight out of, the collection of short stories, Women of Brewster Place, and that my mom kept the apartment that she'd had with my dad. But my father's siblings, they lived literally 140 feet away. And eventually other relatives moved into the same building, the same neighborhood. So I had uncles around who were these models. And I wasn't old enough to measure them against anything. And then my mom met my stepfather, and he had his flaws. And that gave me immediate impetus to compare and contrast and figure out ways of deciphering who will I adopt as father, and who will I expel
But did you know you were doing that?
I knew I was doing it by the time I was 14. Yeah. Like I was very conscious and very, very selective as to who I would commit my time and humanity to.
And did you find someone to fit that role in your life? Or when
Several.
Did you find that?
Have you stopped looking is the other question.
That's interesting. The first question, I found one through high school, and then without looking, I discovered one in college, and then I kept in touch with both of them through my 20s, and I didn't start considering models of father in my, examples of fathers for a 40-year-old until my son was born. And then it was like, all right, like, who are the grandfathers that I would like to have around my son?
And what do you look for in that father figure?
A deep integrity, humor, a vibrant intelligence that is keeping pace with that person's store of wisdom.
Wisdom was the key, was the thing that I was thinking about. Like in my life, the men in my life from a very early age have always been those who sort of like showed some wisdom. And I think that one of the key components of wisdom is empathy, right? So where my father never really empathized with me, never saw anything that I wanted to do as being worthy, I always found other men, the local newspaper photographer, or one of my first teachers in college who became a great mentor, and on and on. It was always sort of like, and I didn't realize that I was doing it until after college. I'm like, these are my fathers. These are the men who have raised me, and I found that to be really sort of joyous. And I ask because like there's a way that I've been thinking about like what's my next great source of wisdom, and I'm climbing into my 60s, and still it's like like there's so much more to learn from those who have come before, and I think it's that sort of like reverence to wisdom and reverence to that search that I find really, really fascinating. And for you, it seems like the writing came first,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, the writing came very, very second, because I found a camera very early on. In fact, a camera was put in my crib when I was a baby. And when I was 5 years old, I asked for a roll of film. And that was it. None of my pictures came out right. And I was super fascinated by why they didn't come out right. Like, I want to do it again. Give me another roll of film. And all through school, I just wanted to be taking pictures. I didn't want to read. I hated reading. And it wasn't until much later in life that we realized that I both had a disorder in my eyes, where my eyes were pointing in different directions, and I'm dyslexic. Mm-hmm. And so, in the 1970s, when you don't like to read, you must be slow, right? And so I was always cataloged as somebody who wasn't very bright, wasn't very motivated. Like, what a crappy thing to say to a kid. You're clearly not very motivated. Yeah. What I was motivated to do was take pictures. And for me, as I was looking for those other men in my life, I realized they were the ones who could communicate through photography. It wasn't just that they knew how to make photographs. It was that they were communicating through photography. And sort of like deeply subconsciously, that's what I was gravitating toward. That's what I was searching for, were the storytellers, the ones who were able to communicate. And to me, that was my great communication, because there's no human being that doesn't want to be heard. There's no human being that doesn't want their narrative to be expressed. How do we do that? We do it in the best way we can. And I know, like, there's kids here who are amazing musicians, amazing artists, amazing at a lot of different things, but not great at, like, language arts. And I see them, and I know what they're doing. They're trying to express themselves in the most expedient way that they can. And for me, that was photography. It was making pictures. People would respond to me. People would look at what I was doing. Of course, when I wrote, no one would read anything, of course, that I wrote, because I had no value, but there was my contribution.
Yeah. Hearing your stories, I wonder if everyone has some kind of deep craving to share stories, but it just manifests in different ways as they have different life experiences. Like, for example, maybe through photography you were able to communicate in a way to spread your own stories through the art form that you found. And when I look at different people, I feel like everyone has their own form of art, painting-wise, stories. For me, maybe it's the podcast. That I love conversations, I love communicating with people, and the more and more I talk to people and I learn their stories, I feel like everyone has a deep sense or craving to share maybe the sense of wisdom with the world. And I was also curious, how do you think we define wisdom? Is it just having knowledge, or is it maybe seeing how that knowledge interacts like in the world itself, or how would you guys look at the definition of wisdom?
Wisdom is an articulation and an understanding that is framed by experience, empathy, and an anchored spirituality. And that spirituality has nothing to do with organized religion. It's just that person is able to look through a lens or a window that grants them a limitless clarity.
I was just thinking that wisdom is sort of a conduit. The person who has wisdom is a conduit. And they're able to funnel in two different directions. Because I think empathy, you have to understand empathy as sort of like a two-way street. It goes, in two different directions. And like I'm thinking about the greatest of my father figures, the greatest man that I knew early on, was a man named George Lee. And George volunteered for the Navy in World War II. He became a photographer, served in the South Pacific, went back into the Navy during the Korean War to teach in Pensacola. He taught other photographers, saw some action in Korean War. And then came back to Santa Cruz, California to teach and be a photographer. And I met George when I was 19 years old and was doing things that I shouldn't have been doing, that we shouldn't do at 19 years old. And I was lost. And I was at the local junior college. And George was a photography teacher there. He wasn't in the art department. He was in the administration of justice program, because cops need to know how to take pictures. And so I took his class because he had a really great darkroom. And one day he pulled me outside and sat me down, and he said, I'm trying to be politically correct, he said, I don't like the way you come to my class. I don't like the condition you're in. And he said, I see that you're really talented. I see that you really love what you're doing, but you're making a joke out of my class. And I'm going to give you two choices. He said, you can clean up, come to my class with a little bit of seriousness, and I will teach you photography. Otherwise, get the hell out of my class. And I was shocked, truly shocked. And I went home and I thought about it. And I won't tell any more of that story, but I said, okay, I'll take you up on it. And to me, that moment, I could still see him. I was sitting on a bench looking up at him with his plastic Kodak apron on, with his glasses like this. He was, this wonderful old first generation American Chinese man. I could still see his face, looking down at me. And what he was doing was he was taking what he knew about the world, what he had proven to himself, the pain that he had been through. And he was then looking at me. And he was saying, I see you. I see you're hiding. I see what's going on. And I'm going to try to pull you back in this direction. So his wisdom became motion. It became a way of pulling me into a new place from what he knew that I needed. And he literally changed my life. It was really an amazing moment. And that was to me, that's the genesis of an understanding of wisdom for me.
Yeah. It goes back to the integrity piece that Mr. Onion was talking about as well, that not really hiding behind any layers and just telling the brutal truth. And I think having a figure in your life that is honest with you is the most important thing, because then when they give you feedback, you know that it's real feedback that you need to take into account. But when they praise you as well, you know you've done something well. And even when I look at people in my life that I respect a lot, I think that integrity piece is there as well, that they're always honest. They try to be honest. And I think sometimes it's difficult to be honest in this world because there's consequences for being honest. Telling the truth 100% of the time, you will face consequences, and you can't get away with things as much as you'd like to. And I find myself lied from time to time, but I think recently I've been reflecting more that one of the values I want to develop more that I feel is important to me, but I don't know if I've really done a great job of exemplifying it, is that integrity piece. That it seems that this mentor you had in your life shows that value really well.
Yeah.
It solidifies within you as you age a little bit. It's hard through your teens because it's really, really difficult to be reflective. And so it feels like more of a risk. But when you finally come to real peace and solidity about who you are, it gets easier. You care less about what someone might think or how they will interpret you. You just, you're clear. Like, this is who I am. This is what I believe. And, the hard part of, like, helping people to appreciate what you tell them, like, that's still difficult. But it gets a little bit easier to be the deliverer of that, sometimes uncomfortable truth.
But integrity also has to do with experience.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that you can't read a book. You can't decide to have integrity and then you have integrity. I think, to me, like the thing I love about Mr. Onion and that I learned really quickly on is that he's had his ass kicked. Is it okay to say?
A little bit.
Right? I mean, this man has seen some things, and what comes out of that is the integrity. And I feel like, if when you meet somebody who hasn't had their ass kicked emotionally, spiritually, physically, and had to bounce back, like, that's when you have to define yourself. That's integrity, is when you have to say, this is who I'm going to be. This is the line, right? This is the line that I'm not going to cross, right? Until you go over that line, you're not going to know where that line is. And if you never risk coming anywhere near that line, which is where you get your ass kicked, right, then you're never going to know where there's always going to be way, way, way down here. I feel like here I'm sort of loud, I'm sort of clumsy, I'm very different than a lot of people here because I was doing a lot of other things in my life. In New York City, really trying to push and push and push and push, in a way, always trying to be at that line. That line is a good place to be. And I feel like sometimes here I'm sort of like a bull in a china shop. Does that make sense?
I have always felt like I'm the only adult that yells at the whole school.
You scared the hell out of me because the first time I met you yelled at all of us faculty.
And I don't know why or when that became offensive. That's how I lived. That's how I grew up. You were a little kid. You lived in the neighborhood. There were 19 adults who felt responsible for you in the neighborhood, and I'm not including my parents in that number. And so you got yelled at. Sometimes you were spoken to, but you could get yelled at. You could get yelled at individually, collectively, it didn't matter. And I went to a traditional fossil of an all-boys school. And in that environment, no one had a first name. You were your last name, and that was it.
Was it appropriate?
Yeah. And, you dealt with the wrath of the cleric. So any one of the priests could yell at you, but we had a headmaster in particular who he loved confrontation. And so he'd raise his voice, but he also believed that it was his responsibility as an educator and then as a man responsible for boys to teach you to be confrontational if you needed it and how to deal with it when you were subject to it. And so the idea that you were going to go off into the world and someone was going to yell at you and you were going to be upset, like that made no sense to him. It's just like, no, like this is the same thing that all of us learned in our homes in the city. Like somebody go out in the world and you in the street, somebody hits you, you hit them back. Period. And so you learn to roll with punches, deflect, hit back. And for most of us, we learn how to be really, really effective with language. And so I can yell at you and just by lexicon do it without raising my voice. But I think sometimes like people need to see and hear that because it's still part of who we are, especially now since I believe people are, when I say people, I mean young people, and by young people I'm going to say, 23, 24 and younger, they're beginning to lose the nuances of really listening and being able to connect inflection with intent. And all the more alarmingly because so many of us walk around hypothesized.
What was that word? I'm sorry?
Hypothesized.
What does that mean?
Our earbuds are in.
Hypothesized.
Nice word.
And so it's just like you. In 1984, no one would have walked around on the street in Newark with earbuds and headphones on. That was an invitation to get robbed. And it was the same thing in New York City. Like, you were down in the Village, you were in Harlem, you were in anywhere, like literally anywhere in Brooklyn or the Bronx. No, you did that. There was a poster board with glaring lights that said, victim, come get everything I have because I'm not paying attention to the world. And now, we live in spaces where we hypothesize and we're not paying attention.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a culture today of comfortability that trying to optimize for this lifestyle where you feel good all the
Sorry, a
time.
culture today of
Comfortability, like comfortable.
yeah, comfortability. Yeah, thank you.
I'm mispronouncing.
No, that's it.
Yeah.
Comfortability.
Okay. Because I think we want to feel happy all the time. People are trying to make you feel positive emotions all the time, like do something that makes you feel good. But I found that when I tried to optimize for that in my own life, I'd say during COVID was a time where I tried to make myself feel good all the time, whether it's playing video games or just doing bad habits and just wasting my time really, because I didn't really get into more discipline and doing more work for myself, like lifting, for example, till a year following for that. So, which is why COVID, it seemed to be this dark time, but for some reason, optimizing for comfortability made my life quality that much worse. I felt like there was more mood swings, there's less like happiness, there's less extreme, there's more life is becoming numb. And I think in a world where it's so easy to live a comfortable life today, I think we should impose some more of the difficulty into our life. We should make our life like not as like easy, because there's some beauty in the relativity you feel in your life when there's some difficult moments every day, you do hard things, and you also can then feel more gratitude and beauty in life as well. So have you seen that play out in your own life? Or
the stakes were higher just by nature of where I lived, and I know for both of us by nature of what was available to us as options of poor choice. And so
I just want to say that, like, if we're going to have this conversation,
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's really fascinating is how connected I feel to you, sort of like intellectually and spiritually and artistically. And like we come from such different places. That's one of the things that's like really fascinating. I mean, I grew up in an idyllic beach town in California, middle class, not a care in the world. You're 16, here's your car, go to a beach party. Like that was my life early on. And I think to me, that's one of the really fascinating jumping off points, because we go from where we started, we go from the stuff that we gathered along the way, and now here we are sitting together with Sharia having this conversation.
And what you realized in my case at 8, 9, 10 years old. All right, so that dude did what felt like easy. He rejected school and found the ease and the laughter and like the beauty, sometimes misbegotten, but still the beauty of the corner. But the corner availed, experimentation, criminality, and then you end up in the clink. And so I have one friend. We've been friends for 50 years. We met when we were 3. And we met in preschool. Both of our households essentially lied about our age so that we could be in preschool because our mothers had to work. And so we were there. We stayed in preschool for a year longer than everybody else because after the fact they realized that we weren't old enough to go to kindergarten. And we were in pace with each other through, middle school. And then, ironically, he went to boarding school and I went to the local all-boys school. And when we were sophomores and juniors, having taken the PSAT and the SAT for the first time, we were getting all of the same mail. So he had mail from Cornell, I had mail from Cornell, he had mail from Dartmouth, I had mail from Chicago. Like this was the horizon, so to speak. And for lots of reasons, not all of them of his design or decision, he had to come back home. He couldn't stay at school. And rather than do what was really, really hard, which was, all right, man, eat this humble pie because you quote unquote messed up at the boarding school and come to school with me. That was too much, face to lose. No, I'm gonna just go to public school up the block. And that gave him the corner. So when I go off to university, he gets arrested. Misdemeanor, home right away. I'm still at university, he gets in trouble again, but now because he's got a prior, he's not just gonna walk away. So he ended up doing serious time. Like, he was facing 15 years, he did like 6. And got out. And we stand seemingly diametrically opposed in our lives and the choices that we've made. But he's really, really blessed in that he found reconciliation and redirection and a lifelong friendship that became a marriage. And that pulled him out of, the dark maze that he was in to another region in the country where he could essentially start over. But like that story, like that lives within me, and that like no. I got people who were as talented as I am, and they got set before a set of choices, and they made the wrong choice, and that just spiraled for them. And I see it all of the time when we reconnect. Where it's just sort of like, this is those choices at 15, 16 were so much more important than we realized. And so it's profoundly aware of, did I do the difficult thing? And was it worth it? Or did I do the easy thing and I end up paying the toll on that choice of comfort down the road. Like I see that a lot. And my four dearest friends who I went through middle school and high school with, and then university during the same years, we all recognize that, maybe we did the hard thing. And, then we went to school and we're better for it now as middle-aged men. So I see that a lot. And I see even more pronouncedly in the young women we grew up with. Those who were just tenacious in their guardianship of their own health, their own liberty, was like, no, like I'm not subjecting myself to a circumstance that could change my life. We will not have a relationship. I will not risk pregnancy. Like I know what is on the horizon for me. And like that was fierce. Those young women at 15, 16, 17 years old, and then 19, 20 growing up with me, they were fierce in their own sense of not comfort, diligence and grit. And so I'm very aware of it now. And I appreciate the rigor, the academic rigor of Peddie. And I applaud the kids who they really grind it out and get all the work done, and they feel great, they got solid grades. But at the same time, I so appreciate and too frequently miss the grit that comes from athletics and breaking a sweat and physical combativeness, because there's as much value in that. And I think that lesson of grit is priceless, really priceless. And you need the grit to have to make the choice, because you can be so academically talented that the rigor's not rigor. You're just going to get the work done. So what in your life is going to push you to, expose you to difficulty? And that's where I think the life outside the classroom has a richness to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I miss that a lot, a lot.
Was soccer the first sport you played? Or?
Nah, I played Pop Warner football. And I'm the runt of my family, though. My cousins are 6'2", 240.
What number did you wear?
I was a running back. I was, depending on the day, I was number 30, I was number 22, 25.
I was 82.
Yeah. I was one of 7 running backs. And we only got to play the one season. But when it was time for me to think about high school, people looked at me. They said, listen, man, based on the law of genetics and averages, you're not going to be very big. And so you're not playing football. Whereas my cousins, they were going to play college football. And it's just all right, fine. So I sort of tripped in to playing soccer. But I was really, really encouraged. So there was a priest in the Ironbound section of Newark who was coaching an opposing team. And he knew my teammates. They all played on a club team affiliated with his church. And so at the end of the game, they're all waving, Father Pete, Father Pete. And he says to them, club soccer starts in 2 weeks, so I expect to see you. And then he pointed at me, and I didn't know him from anybody in the world. And he said, and bring him. And so my friends, they said, Onion, come with us. And so I went to my mother. I said, listen, my friends want me to play club soccer. She said, can you get there on your own? Can you catch the bus? I said, yeah. She said, you could do what you want, because I'm not driving you. And that was it. And Father Pete was really a pillar for me from 15 to 17, and then became a pillar for me again in my mid-20s. Really tangential, but it's my favorite Father Pete story. I was in D.C. in Union Station, waiting with my then girlfriend for my train, and Father Pete comes walking through Union Station with a number of kids who played soccer for him. He had taken them to see the monuments in D.C. And he sees me in the train station through all this crowd, and he walks over to me, and he stops. He shakes my hand, and he looks at my wife, and he said, he's a decent enough guy. And then when years later, like 10 years later, I would see Father Pete again, and he said, did you ever marry that girl I saw you with in the train station? I said, yeah. He goes, thank God you're not as dumb as I thought you were. And then he hit me, like the top of the head, and then, walked off. He married 6 players. Like, he presided over the weddings of 6 players who played for him, who also played for me. And when I see them, like, how's the old man? They know I'm talking about Father Pete. So, like, that was really important. Like that game. And I wasn't a good player by the standard of my peers, but I cared, and so I worked at it. And it wasn't until I got to college where I was like, yo, like, I'm not a bad player. Like, I made a bad choice. I could have gone to Division III school and made a team. And here with this Division I program, like, I can't touch this. They're too big, too fast. And so the sport was wild. It gave me a world. Soccer justified foreign language.
Why is that?
You take Spanish in class, and you speak Spanish in the neighborhood, maybe. And, none of us were of the household budget where we were going to Barcelona for the summer on vacation. But because I was playing soccer down in the Ironbound with this high immigrant population, like, I needed to be able to speak enough Spanish to play. And then same thing happened with learning a little bit of French. So by the time I'm 24, just from playing in parks in the city, I can mumble enough Spanish, French, European, and Brazilian Portuguese to play. Whereas if I just went in with my, limited American English, they would literally look at me and say, "Oh, you're American, you can't play." But if I stepped on the field in any game, toca, 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 or vale. Oh, he speaks the language. He's got credibility. Now, I couldn't read it. I couldn't write a sentence, but I could demand the ball. I could tell you to run. I could tell you to stop, and that was enough. And then when I get a passport, and now it's about global travel and exposure, all of it's still limited to, that game. So that was, all of that came out of that grit of the sport and feeling accomplished because I did the work, and so the game paid me back. It's all right, you did all the work. You got blisters, you bruised, you tore ligaments. Okay, here's a world. And so that was an investment that had a huge return for me. I think here, the musicians get that, the artists get that, the EXP and Summer Sig kids get that, because they see the rigor and the grit in a different environment, and then some of the athletes. But I wish there were opportunity for more of that. But we'll see in time.
I want to go to the story again where you saw yourself and your friend go different paths. You mentioned that it's important that we make good decisions and we do the harder thing instead of the easier thing now for better rewards down the road. How would you know you're on the right path? How do you know that the decisions you're making along the way are leading you to where you want to be?
Certain people leave you. Certain people stop communicating. Not necessarily your dearest friends, but sort of people who have been on that figurative bus with you. They get off at a different stop. And you realize that you don't miss them. There was no falling out. There was no disagreement, no tension. You start to just part.
That's when people base their identity in something about you that they see, and then when you start to change your identity, they no longer identify it, and then that's when people fade away, right? When you rise up, that's when people like resent or whatever that is.
And I guess it helps us draw the line between family and friendship, right? Friendship is more utilizing who you are now for a purpose versus maybe a deeper connection that you feel through someone who's going to be there with you throughout all the change of identity and change of character over time.
Yeah, I phrase that as like the people who love you. Like, because at least within my family, I had family that sort of fell off. They didn't really support my drive or my fascinations. And so we just
Who does
stopped
that guy
talking.
think he is? Who does that guy think he is?
A lot of that. So he's just like, all right, man, go ahead.
Yeah.
But you then recognize who has stayed with you, and you realize that they're on their own journey. And so the two of you are, you got your own vessel, you're doing your own respective navigation, but you appreciate one another for that. And like that's deep. But you don't know how set your course is. Like, to stay with the whole maritime navigation imagery, you're getting up every night looking at the stars to try to figure out, am I on course? Or you double checking your instruments, you're looking at the weather, you're eyeing the horizon to see, like, is there a storm out there? Can I still see the moon? But you don't have a concrete sense.
But it takes time.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to know right away. I mean, 6 years ago, I was at New Jersey City University doing my teacher training, hoping to get a teaching credential. And I was at an inner city school doing my student teaching, and I thought for sure that all that risk that I had taken to close my studio, to say I would be a school teacher, it was like, oh my God, that was a terrible mistake. What have I done? I'm 54 years old. I made a terrible, terrible mistake. And, it wasn't until by a lightning strike of dumb luck, I found myself at the Peddie School, and then even at that, I still sort of had a sense early on that maybe I had made a mistake. And I will tell you that, like, the right path, this year has been the right path. My 5th year has been the time where I go, okay, I see what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing is special, and I know that what I believe in, I can manifest here at this place. And now it's starting to feel like, okay, got it.
And then change will come.
Yeah, and now we're talking about retirement. So how many years am I going to get to, and how can I have maximum impact?
When you say that now you feel as if you're on the right path, that things are starting to align, what do you define as the ideal for, or what part of your life do you see now that it's different than before that shows you that this is correct?
Oh, you're going to make us cry. Both of us.
Mr. Onion talks about his amazing wife a lot, and she is amazing. She's a lovely woman. So I have a really lovely woman in my life. We've been together for 11 years. And as we were talking about change and how do you know you're on the right path? Well, I've gone through a lot of changes in my career, in my life, in my health. And she's always with me. Like, so that person is always there, and it's flexible and it's malleable, and it keeps rolling, right? It keeps becoming something new. I have to be really honest, I don't remember your question because I went to such a personal place.
I think I was gonna go ahead.
There are a couple things. That 5-year requirement for clarity, that applies to a lot. Like a lot of life, especially like professionally. It's like, all right, I think I get this job now. I think I understand my colleagues, and I think I understand my market or my clients, or for us, my students. And I now realize how I need to adapt and how I best can adapt. And where's the happy middle ground for that? And now I can work effectively because I know my curriculum. I know where I fit within the sort of greater body of this school's work or its department. And so I got some confidence now. And I also know like what happens with my students. Like I had that first crop of kids and it's just like, all right, now you're 3 years beyond me, 4 years beyond me. Like I think I did all right by you and you did all right by me. I feel good about that. And somewhere in that stretch of years, like enough people are going to come back and say, yo man, thank you, really appreciate it. Like
Well,
that was the best.
it comes back to the idea of wisdom, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot about wisdom, sort of in a hopeful way. I hope that one day I have wisdom, because I think I was just going to drop a curse, which I shouldn't do. But
You mess up.
You got to be a real jerk to sort of like to declare yourself as being wise. But like if you're always trying to chip off just a kernel of wisdom, I think that's the goal. Like life is like doing that. But for me as a teacher, I'm finding myself being more relaxed, sinking into what I'm doing, believing in what I'm doing, being willing to try new things, seeing the outcome. I've now seen a freshman graduate as a senior, which is huge. And there's a wisdom to take a freshman, a 14-year-old kid, and bring them through, have a couple classes with them and sort of see them, maybe be an advisor, see them in the dorm, that kind of stuff. And to watch that kid grow up, like I've learned so much. To watch a 14-year-old become an 18-year-old, it's amazing. It's amazing to watch a 14-year-old become an 8-year-old and to have some bit of connection to that human being. And I think that, like, as I say, I feel better about what I'm doing. I feel like now I'm on the right path. It's because those cycles are completing. So you complete a cycle, you take what you've learned from it, you put it into the next cycle. You're going to make mistakes, And I think for me, I used to think I was a new teacher. I'm not a new teacher anymore, but every mistake I made in my first year, I thought, oh my God, they're going to fire me. And there's something about going, yeah, they're not going to fire me. So it makes you more willing to make mistakes. It makes you willing to lean in and know that the boundaries aren't so like terminal.
Yeah. You can cultivate your own wisdom if you are attentive enough to the people who need your attention and you reflect on what you did, your approach, your sentiment, your tone, the depth of your engagement, and your willingness to understand and forgive and then try again. Because then you do that enough, you really start to understand people. And you come to a deep understanding of yourself relative to other people. But to do that, like, you got to be your own critic. Like, you got to be reflective, and you got to have people around you who you can share all that with, and they're honest with you. Like that's a big deal.
Isn't that a big part of teaching? Like, and I say that as someone who critiques art and encourages kids to critique one another's art. is that it's really hard for a young artist to say anything critical about one of their peers' work.
Even themselves at times.
Oh, absolutely.
I find that hearing both of you talk, you both are very reflective and critical about your own life stories. But I think when we see, maybe it's just because we're still young, but when I observe people around me, I feel like a lot of people lack that ability to reflect and have clarity about how their mind works and the thoughts that are going through their mind. And I've seen myself in that state as well, that I try to be reflective. I try to look at the decisions I've made and who I am as a person on a daily basis. Like, I try to spend time every day in isolation just trying to reflect on my own life experiences and decisions I'm making. But I don't know, I feel like when I look at people around me, there is that lack of clarity about their own thoughts and ability to reflect and critique. And I wonder if that's something that just you've developed with age, with time, or you've always had that nature to reflect. Or
I don't think it works that way. I think if you're honestly reflecting the way you are, then you're the outlier. I mean, physically, the frontal lobe of the brain doesn't completely form until after the age 25. So then, and that's your ability to see, the future ramifications of the decisions that you make today, right? And I think that, like, at some point in time, like, if you're too choked down, if you're too thoughtful at a certain age, you might end up not making the mistakes that are going to make you grow. I mean, like, I want to make a list of dumb shit you've done. But, like, you wouldn't know who you were, right, today, right, if you hadn't done those dumb things. Right. Like, God, the dumb things, that I've done, the risks I take for no reason, for no reward. And I think that's a big component of being young. But at the same time, I think you're absolutely right. And I think, coming back to the idea of, one of my frustrations about teaching and understanding teenagers, which I still don't think I understand teenagers, but it's like a teenager makes a thing, whether it's a piece of 3D art or a photograph or something. And we say, okay, what do you guys think about this? Oh, I think it's really great. What makes it great? I don't know. I just think it's great. Well, how could it be better? Oh, I don't know. I think it's great. And it's like, but it's not great. And it's not great. So let's help this student grow. But it's like, oh no. And then, like, if you go too hard at that student, say, no, it's not great and here's why, then you alienate kids. Then, it's like a really hard thing. Mr. Dale's really hard, because he didn't like my work. It's like, no, Mr. Dale wants you to grow from your work. I need you to reflect and think about how you made that work. We're going to take what works out of it. We're going to take what's working, and then we're going to learn from that. But that process for kids is really, really hard to do. I assume it's hard to do, to get a kid to look at an essay that they spent hours and hours writing that they think is brilliant.
You are also of an age wherein, probably starting around 7, 8 years old, a lot of your quote unquote downtime was device anchored. So you had a tablet, and then you got a phone. And so we are increasingly less interior. We're not alone with our thoughts, we're alone with the device. And the device is incessant bombardment, detaching you away from your inner self. And when I'm leading the whole school and chapel, I see the discomfort. And now you're alone with just you. You're not alone in the room, so to speak, but you're alone in that you have no appendage, the phone, to anchor you. And so I think that's really, really, really critical. Like, if you want to learn to be reflective, then you have to give up the distraction.
And I think, Sharia, you said the magic word. You are alone. I believe you've talked about meditation before, have you not?
Yeah.
Right? And, like, the act of meditation is so restorative to your brain. We know that science says you need to relax your brain at certain points in times and do that in a mindful way. Meditation, as you know, is not just relaxing your brain, but it's becoming more and more mindful. But I think that what we see are, kids walk out of class, they're all walking across campus like this. It's like, slow down, digest some of what you just learned, reflect on what you just learned, and maybe that's a skill that we need to talk about.
Bill said it perfectly. I mean, the number of times I've drove at a gas station and look at the car over, and there's a mom on her phone and her daughters are on her phone on the side seat, and you walk into a restaurant and there's 4 people, the entire family sitting there on their phone. And not only is it a distraction to yourself that you can't comprehend and understand your own mind, I think that it also destroys your relations with others, the lack of presence. And I love this topic a lot because I think it's been one of the biggest themes of the last year of my life. About a year ago, I made the decision to delete all social media, to delete most of the apps off my phone, and I lowered my screen time from about 4 hours to 20 minutes, which I hold today, that I barely use my phone. I track the number of times I pick it up. I try to pick it up less than 10 times a day when I really need to use it for something like call a family member or start a timer for something. And I've made a few changes to my life in the last year, but there's nothing that I can describe as life-changing as compared to
that.
Lowering the screen time on my phone, because you really get pulled out of the bubble and you see the world for where it really is and see the distracted nature of people, their fleeting presence, that they're not even there sitting with you often. And lowering the time I spend on my phone, it's improved my mental state. I think, as I was talking about the nature of reflecting, I think that grew when I stopped using my phone a year ago, and the last year of my life is because of that. I've been more reflective. I've been able to observe maybe the flaws and peculiarities of my own mind, and I think we all have them. We just try to ignore them, or we try to hide away from them because it's scary. It's the second you, as you described, you're sitting alone in a chapel with no distraction. It's painful sometimes, and sometimes when I sit back and ask myself, why is it painful? Like, what is driving me to do what I do? And I sometimes realize that I'm just being ruled by desires. I'm being ruled by human nature elements of desire to be validated, desire to feel like I'm socially in a crowd. And so much of those desires ruled who I was for so many years of my time in high school and middle school. This craving for validation. But I'm happy to say that in the last year it's gone away. I've observed it so much. I've, as you've said, meditated and been present with it. And I don't have that craving anymore of feeling the need for people to like me. And that's allowed me to explore my interests even further.
When you can control your own impulse, like, that's a triumph. And the speed and scope of the device just broadens the impulse. And so the apps that I took from my phone that gave me peace, I removed all of the news apps, because there was a stretch where literally, like, the New York Times was killing me. It was just more and more reason to be angry or sad, and so I just deleted it altogether.
Hey, Mark, I'm going to ring the alarm for like 1 second. You guys will have to leave.
That's all right.
You can edit it out.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
There's a book you should read.
Okay.
Called Fear of Insignificance. And basically what they're saying is that the constant, social media thing, constant posting, constant trying to, I suppose that it's still beeping,
I'm sure it'll turn off.
is like, we just don't want to be insignificant, right? And so we're posting and posting and posting as a culture, right? We're posting because it makes us feel significant. But that significance only lasts for an hour, 2 hours, right? The people stop commenting on your post in like 9 hours, and then it's all over. And so what do you have to do to feel significant again?
Then you post.
You have to post again, right? And it's that rabbit wheel. Or you look at they talk a lot about dopamine addiction. So you see something, you like it, dopamine, and you go and see
It's how they
again.
design the
dopamine.
apps.
Yeah, exactly. Anyhow.
And you were also talking about the news when the fire alarm went off.
I'm dealing with, every chapter of the American political horror show. And so I just said, all right, I'm taking this off my phone. And then I take sabbaticals from social media apps. So I will announce, like, all right, see you all in a month. And I would like to really abandon most of the apps altogether, but I have to work to do that. So I've taken to collecting addresses. I still send postcards. And I'm just going to have to dwindle down to the 22 people that I really talk to, as opposed to my 1,100 followers.
I found the opposite. To be really honest with you, by getting rid of social media off my phone and by not looking at Twitter and Instagram, Facebook, right? I find that I'm more measured and more capable of looking at the news without a tremendous amount of affect.
Okay.
I'm more logical about the news without social media sort of like informing my rage.
Yeah, if I spent time and thought about it, I would probably come to that understanding. So all of my periodical reading is in one place, and I try to have it be arranged. But what I have done is I don't follow the same people in social media, and the people who are dear to me, who get on their own soapbox, like I'm able to say to them, like, don't tag me in your mess. Like, I don't want to be bothered. And I have friends, like, I unfollow. Like, I will go to their page or go to their account and see what they're doing, but I don't want to be part of their notification circle. And the other thing that I've done, and it's very easy for me, is I have no real active connection to television. Like, not even to streaming services. I just don't have the drive. But I didn't have a television for a long, long time. And I've never had a TV. I've never had a TV in my room as an adult. So like the rules in the house are no devices in bedrooms, no televisions in bedrooms. And for the most part, our phones stay downstairs.
That's good.
And that was pretty easy to do. But where we struggle, and we're going to address it, is we eat dinner and we will agree to watch something together, but then we still sit on our islands. She has her phone, he has his tablet, I have my laptop, but we're quote unquote watching something together. So we're moving toward, no tech days. Like on this day, you can't have a device in this space. And so it's just like, all right, that's fine.
I'm going to call security. I think he forgot to turn that strobe light off.
Sure.
What was his name? Who's his
Roddick.
name? What is it?
Roddick.
Roddick.
I actually have to go cook dinner anyway.
Yeah, you can let me know whenever you want to close off.
I'd be happy to do this again.
Okay.
That's no problem.
So you want me to make this call, or are we done?
Let's call him anyway. 'Cause,
Okay.
So what was the foundation for your education and access to this as a vehicle and platform?
I would say I was more on the side of a normal person in terms of content consumption a few years ago, where if I was my free time, I'd spend it like watching sports and watching.
Hey, Roddick,
television,
this is
Netflix.
Craig Dale. We're over in Long Street, and the strobe light is still going off here.
And I think that about maybe a year ago or so,
Thank you so
I
much.
kind of started to cut
Thank
that
you.
off more slowly over time, but more started to realize that I was kind of wasting my time. I started to get this feeling that if I'm watching a basketball game or I'm watching a movie, I got this feeling as if, why is he living my life for me? And that was a feeling that made me feel as if I'm sitting on my couch watching someone play basketball instead of going out and playing a sport myself.
There's a great quote for you.
I realized during COVID when I was like falling in love with all these photographers on Instagram. Oh, Instagram is so cool! I get to see all these photographers. But when I put my phone down from looking at Instagram, I was really feeling crappy about myself. Like this guy's in Greece making these beautiful. This guy's over here. This was over here. This was over here. And I ended up feeling really kind of like I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough. And I was allowing Instagram to sort of like set a bar for me that I was never going to hit.
Well, there's two problems with that, right? Because first of all, the things you see on Instagram are probably not real. They're just collections of the best moments of someone's life portrayed to you and make you feel as if you're not able to meet that threshold for some reason when they're not showing you all the other aspects of their life.
Yeah.
And second of all, when you see everyone all their time, all their best moments, your expectation of what constitutes a normal, fulfilling life increases so high that the threshold between where you believe you should be compared to where you are is always in this negative region, which is why I think a lot of people's life is colored by the sense of unsatisfactoriness, that they go about their day, they go to school, they do their sports, but there's always a sense of lack that I think is input into their minds through the content consumption, as you've described.
Yeah.
French philosopher Jacques Rancière.
I was going to go with Guy Debord now for French philosopher. This is where we are.
To be a spectator is to be separated from both the capacity to know and the power to act. So you just sit there, getting stupid, and you just forget how to do something.
Yeah.
Guy Debord he wrote a book called The Society of the Spectacle. He wrote it in 1967, but if you read it, it reads like he wrote it yesterday. Because what he says is that our lives are separating from the reality of our lives. He wrote this in 1967. And he said people are separating into the idea of self and the actual self down here, and our society is based in spectacle, right? And he was talking about advertising images, magazine images, all that kind of stuff. This is what my teaching is based in. This is why I'm teaching these sort of like French structuralist radical thinkers about images and language, right?
And visual literacy.
And visual literacy, that's exactly right. But Guy Debord said, what he was looking at was like, we are not making decisions based in love and connection and true intelligence and true wisdom. We are making the decision whether to take out more of a loan to buy, in his case, the Peugeot 790, or like, what am I gonna, like, oh my God, I have to have. And modern consumption, right? A modern consumptive society is based in completion, right? If a human being ever felt complete, they would no longer be a consumer, and the world can't have that. It's that easy, and it goes all the way back. The term conspicuous consumption was coined by a guy named Thorstein Veblen. He wrote a book called The Theory of the Leisure Class. He wrote it in the late 1800s. And what he said was people are starting to disconnect from what should be the real in life.
It's crazy you wrote that so far back, too.
There's another book, and I'm not going to try to quote it. Feuerbach wrote, Mr. Dale, you're so dumb. The Elements of Christianity. And he wrote it in the 1700s. And he wrote the same thing. In fact, Guy Debord's book, the preface of his book features a quote from this book on the essence of Christianity, where Friar Feuerbach, I'm sorry, I'll get you the reference, says what should be, this is written in the 1700s, right? What should be sacred is becoming profane, And what should be profane is becoming sacred. And that is the essential element of consumer society, right? I'm going to spend my time worshiping that car. I'm going to spend my time worshiping a Kardashian or whoever is, like, I'm going to spend my time. And those are the things that like spirituality should tell us that that's actually profane. But we are, as a society, holding those things as sacred and worshiping and spending our money, and in fact going into debt as a society to achieve that profanity that we have twisted into sacredness.
I heard this quote from this author, Yuval Noah Harari, who says that religion has died, the new religion is consumerism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
But the precursor to that is Augustine, City of God, in his critique of the lavish wealth and consumerism of the Roman Empire. And so you find these treaties on consumerism, behavior, the value of the self, the inner life, the life of heart and mind. They parallel what are market peaks or sort of like market scope. So Augustine is writing at the very, very end of the Roman Empire, and he's seeing the sort of essentially the failure of the political church. And then when you get to the 1700s, what you're starting to see is the spike in wealth that is coming out of expansive colonialism. And not the sins of the colonialism, but what the wealth is actually doing to the market cities, London, Paris. And when you get to the 60s, you get this other wave of this is what we're seeing in the wake of World War II, and industrialization and the last sort of burning embers and ripe fruits of colonialism, because then that really sort of dissolves through the last remnants of it dissolve in the 60s and 70s. And so this is always the wake up. And what I marvel at right now is how short our memories are in failing to appreciate some of the peace of mind that came with the shutdown. Bicycle shops were cleared out to the last bolt because people went and purchased bikes and skates, and we're going to be outside, we're going to do all these things, and we all drifted and then dove wholeheartedly back into the same swamp that had been drained for us, but we didn't remember what that beauty was. And so I think there's going to be some other type of cyclical cataclysmic problem that'll make us hit reset again and then think about, all right, like, what do we do?
Yeah, I hope we can continue to move in the right direction, but
I think in pockets we will.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I believe so. Well, Mr. Dale, Mr. Onion, thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
been a great conversation, touched on a lot of topics I'm really interested in. Hearing your stories have been incredible. So definitely try to get back another time. Both
Yes.
of you.
Maybe we'll talk about photography next time.
Maybe. But like, all it really is an umbrella of life. So
Yeah,
that's what happens.
That's the thing about I love conversations so much because they can go in any direction. Like, there's so much that we can. The way it flows, I think, the way it jumps from topic to topic.
Yeah.
There's always I've always had that interest in me, that joy of a conversation. Which
Yeah, you are really good at listening, I think, in the way that you want to be heard. It's clear when you're listening that you are listening super intently, which is probably what you hope for when
Thank
you're
you.
speaking. Yeah.
What are you doing this summer?
I'll be at home, just focused on fitness, athletics, and working on the podcast before I go off to college.
And where are you going?
University of Michigan.
All right. I'll do some thinking. This is good.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll stay in touch for sure. If you enjoyed that episode, then you're gonna love this episode right here. Make sure you click here, watch that video, and don't forget to like and subscribe.